Thank you, Ms. Bijapurkar, for accepting our invitation. And it must be a busy day for you because you do all of the things, but I also saw you in a bit of election-related analysis. And since we await the election results tomorrow, so must be kind of a busy day for you coming out. Uh, for people who joined us right now, and for people who are going to be watching it later, this is the book that ostensibly we are going to be talking about. But because when you have a person like Ms. Bijapurkar, the conversation can't be just about one particular book. It has to have an in-depth conversation about consumer profiling across. So I've read rave reviews of the book. I've read reviews of the book by people who do not write reviews. I'm referring to Mr. Sanjay Baru, who actually uh, took the time out to write a review in one of his columns. And it's been a very interesting story. It's been a very interesting conversation around consumer choices. We're going to jump into all of that. But before we get into that, your first book came out in 2008. It was ostensibly also about trying to understand the Indian consumer between 2008 and 2023-24, when this book has come out. What all has changed in the Indian consumer story from your side, but also from the side of industries as a whole?
But first of all, thank you very much for having me here and for moderating this session. I look forward to you leading me because I can tend to run away with whatever is in my head, which is sometimes never relevant to the topic. Each of the books has been written at a time when there was a certain discourse and it was meant to clarify the discourse. The first one, We Are Like That Only, was written at a time when there was a lot of hype about the great Indian middle class, when companies were asking India or China, why on earth should we even worry about you? It was happening when we didn't really understand our consumption story in any structured way. And I used to work for a global consulting firm at that time, and every time I said India was different, you would get beaten up and told that it's not different and that India is like Mexico X number of years ago, America Y number of years ago, and so on. Between then and now, certainly people don't say that anymore. I think that's a big change. People don't say why India when we already have China. I think the or has gone. It's India and China. I also think we have understood our consumption story, at least its potential, its opportunity. In fact, we think of ourselves as a big consumption engine. We think of people as consumers, and consumption has since 1991 been morally purified, and it's a good thing. So I think a lot of that has changed. I think consumers have now learned to be far more sophisticated consumers than they were earlier. In the old days, we were just starting out on our consumption journey, and we were not sure what our consumers were ready for or not. Now we know that they're up for literally anything that will add value to them. And again, I want to say the thing about India is that the more things change, very often the more they remain the same. So yeah, our incomes have grown, but we are not a rich country and we won't be for a long time. Yes, our overall GDP has grown, but our per capita GDP is still much lower in the rankings. Education profile has not dramatically changed. Our occupation profile has not dramatically changed. So in some ways, the structure of our consumer story has not changed. The behavior has changed. And I think from then to now, the whole digital revolution has swept us. I mean, that is like really a big deal for us. So we're now probably the most digitally savvy place on earth. I don't know, Among, how many good morning messages you got on WhatsApp and how many deep fakes we're seeing. But I think that to me are the big things.
Right. So before we kind of jump into the other nitty-gritty that you have in the book, one of the sort of a cardinal question that keeps on coming up in the book is about the structure. And you spend actually 2 chapters kind of laying out for lack of a better word, the vertical and the horizontal split of the Indian consumer base. We have a lot of young students and young members of the business school of SGT who have also joined in. What is the great sort of 30,000 foot view message that you would have for them when they look at it from the business case, that they should be analyzing the individual and the macro consumer base in India?
Judging from my students, they don't really want to know. But I will just say, I hope yours are better. But I think what I mean by structure is just, let's take a good hard look at all the people that make this up. Where does the money lie? Where does the income lie? Where does the occupation lie? What's happening? Who and not what is being sold, but who are these people? And let's talk. And where do they live? And let's talk a little bit about them. The first message I would give them is that behind all the chest thumping of us being the fifth largest economy trending to third, which is true, and behind all we're the first, second, third largest anything in the world, also true, I want them to know that we are large numbers of everything, made up of lots and lots and lots of small things. So we are a large economy made up of lots and lots and lots of small consumers. So I want them to recognize and know that large is not equal to rich, that if we are number 5 in the ranking, you look at number 4's per capita income, which is how rich they are, and you look at number 6's per capita income, and they're a factor of 10 or more richer than we are. So I think we should never forget that India is a large economy made up of lots and lots and lots of modest income, modestly educated people. I think that's the first most important thing. So I think we should embrace our demographics and not pretend that it is something else. As I wrote somewhere else, if 100 people have bought Lamborghinis in India, and they have, worldwide Lamborghini sells 10,125 Lamborghinis or some such number, between 10 and 11,000. So the 100 in India is a big deal for them, but they're not a big deal for us, because we also sell 4.1 million cars, if that's the number, and all that is only bought by the top 10% of India. So I want them to know that a small percentage of a large number, arithmetically, is a large number. So the macros are huge, the micros are not so huge, and I think that's what makes us special and unique and different and painful. I also want them to know that, as I say in my first chapter, God is in the detail. So everything you say about India, look at the data carefully. So on the one hand, if I count up the number of CEOs with stock options, they are large in number. If I look at the Sensex going berserk, it looks like the world is made of listed companies. But if you actually look at employment in India, the corporate sector employs 4 or 5%, or the formal sector employs 4 or 5% of the country. 95% is unemployed, is not unemployed, sorry, is informally employed. Or that 1/3 of households are still dependent on casual labor. So I think there are all sides to the story. It's fragmented. The villages do as well as the cities. Small towns which don't have many rich people collectively account for a lot. So I want them to know and never forget that there is a collective, there is an individual, there is a multiplication, and that is our structure.
Right. So now I jump into the basically asking you indirect question. I'm going to be asking you direct question. One of this, and this is fascinating because I very rarely find, especially in the Indian context, an anthropologist being quoted in the early part of a business book. You use Arjun Appadurai's metaphor of seeing by way of information. And then it kind of keeps on coming up even later in the book about value. What is it about information value that the Indian consumers want the companies to know, but the companies don't really want to pay great attention to it? And what does it mean about consumption in the next 25 years?
Wow. Okay. Help me as I go along if I have not understood the question fully. I think Arjun's point, and I was very struck by it, and I am also doing a study on Young India with an anthropologist from IIT Madras, which I've been writing about in my Business Standard columns. I also do a course at IIM Ahmedabad where we're forcing anthropology down the throats of engineers. So one module is neuroscience, one is anthropology, and one is big data. And the idea is that there are psychological foundations of behavior, there are cultural and social foundations of behavior, the anthropology bit, and there's all the data that floats around, and that they're all equally valid ways of looking. So this anthropologist has explained, we use the word aspiration, I don't know, as often as we drink a cup of tea, aspirational Indian, aspirational consumer, aspiration. But as they say in the Maggie hot and sour ads, par ye hai kya? What is aspiration? And what Arjun basically says is that you don't dream sitting in a dark room with no informational resources. All your dreaming comes when you have informational resources to enable you to dream. So if you see a lot around you, then you say, when I get rich, I will have this, I will have that, I will do this, I will do that. You make a story of your life and you start putting objects and services and things that you're going to have at that time to mark that passage. We know it all the time, right? Gadi Bangla, suit boot, these are all, where does it come from? It comes from a certain set of informational resources that allow us to imagine this better life. And I think that, so that is one thing I say continuously, that please remember that the consumer is looking across the board at a large number of things and deciding what the consumer wants. On the issue of value processing, yes, I have been sort of pushing back on a lot of companies. Value processing to me is what every consumer does. The consumer has an algorithm inside his or her head. Whether you're rich or poor, you have an algorithm. You look at the offer that is given to you and you put it through your algorithm and you decide ki paisa vasool hai ki nahi vasool hai. Is it adding value to me, benefit minus cost, or is it not? Now, I have said in my first book as well, and in fact, C.K. Prahlad, who wrote the foreword to my first book, had a very nice line in the foreword. He said, Rama says, and I wish I had said that, listen to the logic of consumer India from within. So if we can get into people's heads and listen to their value processing, and many examples of this, I'll give you one story. And a woman who would be, let's say, social class C, which is in the lower, definitely a lower 1/3 of income, and of the income spectrum. And she works as a beautician. She comes to people's homes and does facials and stuff. And she said to me, Madam, mere ghar mein, in my house, I have 2 pay channels for movies. And I said to her that you're lower income, why do you need 2 pay channels for movies when there's so many free channels? And she said, I have 2 teenage boys, and when they step out of the house, they will spend money, so it's better to keep them at home. So in her head, in her algorithm, it's paisa vasool. She goes further to say that if the latest movies are coming on that channel and I don't have it at home, my mother-in-law will go to the neighbor's house to watch TV. Who's going to cook dinner while I come to your house and charge premium rates from you because you working women have no time except late evening? Now, there are many, many, many such examples. For example, everybody who has a car also has a two-wheeler. The overlap is really quite phenomenal. And the richer households are using the car for status signaling and the two-wheeler for running around. But if you have only a two-wheeler, then that is your status signal. So you find the situation where less income people are buying more advanced two-wheelers and high income people are buying less advanced two-wheelers. So there are many examples I have in my book also of how people process value, and I really wish companies would look at value processing from inside consumers' heads and their algorithms rather than us deciding that this is what you need to do. And consumers in India have said this a lot. This may be cheaper, but oil chikna hoga, so you need to use more oil because it's thick. And so as a result of that, you will end up using more even though it's cheaper, so it doesn't work.
Thank you. Although I'm going to come back to the future bit in a bit.
In the future, I think we will continue. I think we are a very spoiled consumer base, and maybe later we can discuss why we're spoiled. But I think we will continue to be the most demanding in terms of value processing algorithms that are very sharp, and we will extract as much value as we possibly can out of suppliers. And I think suppliers should be ready for that. That's my
Right. That's a good cautionary thing. I was actually about to jump to something that you refer to quite in the book, uh, and you refer to it in different ways. But one of the key takeaways is that the Indian companies that are coming in now, the Indian startups that are coming in now, I think you refer specifically to Nika as an example of extracting value and understanding the Indian consumer psyche. But if one were to look at reviews of some of these things online, and I actually, after I read the book, I went online just trying to understand. A lot of the startups start with a very clear understanding of who the consumers are. But at some point of time, once the investment money has come in, once the venture capital money has come in, there is a certain Americanization of the firm that happens. And then they go off. They're back to trying to find the ideal consumer. And she might not exist in reality because the person that they're claiming for. So when I read the book, and this is a question because you're not just an author, you're not just a professor of management, you're also an advisor to these firms. Take us through this. What happens? What is this reason to create this straw man or straw woman of the ideal consumer? And how do we kind of get rid of this?
Yeah, firstly, I don't know if it's Americanization because sometimes American companies are very sharp about consumers. But if you say pressure from, let's say, your VC to find the ideal consumer, I don't know. I think this relates to, generally speaking, and that is actually one of my books called Customer in the Boardroom, Crafting Customer-Based Business Strategy. I think a lot of business strategy just forgets about the consumer. That is also a course I have taught for 20 odd years called Customer-Based Business Strategy, CBBS. And we set it up because I felt that if you look at the business strategy document of any company, the word consumer figures, I don't know, if at all, in page 112 or something like that. So the reason all this happens is because to begin with, you are really believing that business is so much fun and the consumer is not important. If you believed that your revenue numbers, which drive your valuation, are equal to people and are influenced by consumers, because if the consumer doesn't buy, you're not going to get a revenue. Consumer doesn't come back, you're not going to get profitable revenue growth. So if you do believe that, then you will have a strong consumer concept. I think there is also greed. I think greed makes you do things in the short term, and we see a lot of that. We see a lot of very nice market-tested, pilot-tested models that have lost their way. What stresses me out is that now people have a word for it. It's called pivot. I don't understand pivot. I mean, pivot to me gives me a picture of a weather vane like you see in the airport that changes every time the wind changes. So if you are to be true to a customer-based strategy, who am I? Why do I exist? Business is a value delivery system. Choose the value to the consumer, deliver the value, and signal the value. If you believe in a lot of these disciplines, you will not be pivoting madly. You will have some kind of structure. So I think people's bad behavior doesn't make a theory meaningless. It just means that people will take some more time before they figure out that the consumer can kill you. And that is exactly the reason why when a lot of people have scaled without thinking about scale, and as you put it, they think there's an ideal consumer out there and never mind who that person is and never mind how that person processes value. Then they fall off the unicorn table, and you can't fool all of them all of the time as far as VCs go. But there has to be a fundamental discipline called a customer-based strategy. This ideal consumer, who's my consumer, the ideal consumer, I think that is just something that you want to put into a document. You don't want to spend time really thinking about it. You also don't like the demographics of the country, because if you say, I want someone who earns 4 lakhs a month and lives in a 3-bedroom house, and every time I put out data on occupation and income, people get very upset indeed, because that's not what you want to hear. And then now I'm finding that there's this lovely new phrase called persona. And I'm saying, what the hell is a persona? You're not doing segmentation. but you're putting four sort of straw men, as you call it, and you say, these are the four people in an ideal world I just dreamed up yesterday, and let me tell you all about them. And I often say that, can you please, and very often when presentations are made to me, either at the board or anywhere else, I say that, can you please rephrase this sentence, putting the word customer in the middle of this sentence? So if you say, we are going to pivot and deliver value and therefore get a particular persona to appreciate us better, I'm like, can you just reconstruct the sentence?
Right.
And I'm conscious that I'm on record saying all these awful things, so you can edit them for
absolutely
for political correctness.
We'll send it to you, and you can actually have us edit out whatever you don't want to go out. We'll give you that. But I'm so glad that you brought up the things that you brought up towards the end. There is a certain amount of you have a certain amount of, I don't think scorn would be the correct word, but fury on digital marketing. And because consumption story is part marketing, and what's going on there? You have a certain amount of angst for the Pincode marketing that is going on. And that's the thing. Because when you talk about Lilliput land, and if I were to give you an example, I would actually go to Instagram and would actually look at the influencer world. Now, influencer world is large, but you have some people who kind of give advice to a lot of other people on how to behave, dress, use cosmetics in a certain manner. All of this, in some ways, is part of digital marketing. But how is this changing the landscape of consumption for a largely young country? And what do marketers do better, knowing the consumption story?
Yeah. So yes, I do go to war against pin code marketing, because I say that when you just the other day I spoke at some conference. I saw a very smart young e-retailer who's doing very well, and I looked at what he was selling, and I said, "Who buys?" And he said, "Oh, we deliver to X number of pin codes." And I said, "Yeah, but tell me what these pin codes actually mean. I mean, who buys? Is Ghatkopar buying, or Sarojini Nagar buying, or Lodi Colony buying, or I mean, who's buying?" And he said, "Well, all kinds of people are buying everywhere." Now, this is the kind of stuff that to me doesn't sound like marketing at all. I also have an issue with performance marketing. I think it's very good as so there's marketing science and there's marketing engineering, right? So I think the engineering piece is quite nice. You measure, you do again, you do whatever seems to make sense. But what you're missing out in the whole thing is a why. And if you don't know a why, then how do you build resilience? How do you build a multiplier effect for your effort? How do you scale with less and less cost, the more and more you scale? How do you get customer acquisition in some kind of way which is cost effective? So that's my issue on a lot of the marketing engineering. Science without engineering doesn't make sense. Engineering without the science of it doesn't make sense. When it comes to influencers, I think it also fits the Lilliput land story, where we're saying that there are loads and loads of people who have small little groups around them, and those groups are in a sense a buying group. In the old days, it was called a zamindar. Otherwise, there was a wholesaler. Otherwise, you went and asked your retailer. In the days when Hindustan Lever was born, the retailer would tell you, "Ki benji ghee mat use karo, dalda use karo," and whoever was in catchment area would do it. So it's just that influencers have taken a different shape and form. They have a different kind of influence. But if you look at the influencer, my question is that, do influencer communities, are they all kinds of people, higgledy-piggledy mess that come together in a community? I mean, there are some influencers whose community I don't want to be a part of. I don't like who they are. I don't like how they dress. I don't like their style statement. I think I know better than them. So if influencers have fairly clear segments around them, then you are back to understanding what those segments are and which influencers you want to target. So influencer, in a sense, is a proxy for a sigma of consumers, right? So I just feel that if you lose sight of the concept, or for example, this whole D2C brands. I mean, I keep saying, if you're selling through Amazon, explain to me how you're D2C. Amazon is the wholesaler in the middle, the retailer in the middle. And if you say I'm selling D2C, I also say in my book that if you throw a stone in a crowded Indian marketplace, you will hit 100 people. Similarly, if you just set up a brand and put it online, etc., you will make a certain 3 digits of crores without a problem. But where do you go from there if you don't know who's buying and why they're buying and how they're thinking about you and how to make that better? That's my issue.
No, I think that's a valid thing, because so we research on Asia, and one of the things we are trying to do is trying to understand the consumer base in China versus India. And the story is very, very different. And part of the story, and I think you referred to the Cantor survey, but they put out a blog piece, I think a month back. And they're still trying to understand the Indian middle class. And you made a very good case for it throughout the book about, different sections. How do you actually understand the top 20%, the 20% after this, and then the entire base after it? But take me through the problem of scale that you refer to. So you refer to a large FMCG company, which is big, but has not really been able to scale to the base that an equivalent company of that size in the US or Germany would be able to do. So from the book, the small is driving India's consumption story, but how is the small, or rather, why is the small not able to consolidate into big? And I'll give you an example of this. Let's say large Indian companies, sometime in the middle 2000s, they decided to, or early 2000s, they decided to go abroad. They set up shops. They said, now we have to look beyond because we have conquered the Indian market. Then, even so, 2008 happened, the financial crisis happened. Most of these companies started coming back with one feet still hovering outside, not firmly outside, but still hovering outside. But now you look at any large Indian corporation, the oldest or the newest on the block, they're all making super apps. They're all betting on the Indian consumption story. But they're betting on different versions of the Indian consumer story. And my question to you is, make it make sense, because the consolidation is not happening from the area that is able to drive a large bargain. And you have these large players that are coming into it, which are not really at odds and ends. They have a lot of data, they have a lot of information, they have a lot of market power, but all of it is not adding up to the full 100%.
I think that the answer is actually, to me at least, seems quite simple. If you look at India's income pyramid, going back to your first question and my first answer, we're not as rich as we think we are. So a lot of companies want to target the richer people because they can pay more, and because doing a high volume, low margin business is a really painful thing for many reasons that we all know. And so I think they're saying that if the top of the pyramid is good enough for me, the top 20% is good enough for me, then why do I need the rest of it? And in any case, post-COVID, the top 20% is half the economy. Pre-COVID, it had about 40%. So they're saying, that's fine, I don't need that. And then you say, oh gosh, do I really need to go rural, urban here, there? If I just did the top 50 towns, I think that should be okay. But then if you take the top 20 towns and the rich people and those who buy in modern trade and those who are well educated enough to understand your messages or have the lifestyle you want, you're ending up with a country the size of Thailand. So your strategy is not, as I often say, is it a market for your strategy or is it strategy for your market? If the market for your strategy is as small as it is, then that's the way it is. And so they have left the field wide open, except a handful, which I talk about in my book. But by and large, companies have left the field wide open for smaller businesses. And that's why the so-called unorganized sector, I don't think we should use the word unorganized anymore or disorganized or anything. It is small and big. So I think the small sector is really deeply entrenched. And I think they have over 50 to 60% of most markets, most consumer markets. And not only do they have that, there are also service providers who buy from them. So the cleaner guy is not coming in with Procter & Gamble cleaning liquid. He's coming in with something, but he's delivering you the results. And the small sector, in the meanwhile, has had every opportunity and every education. And that's the genius of what I love about India. And they have actually become better and more sophisticated. You look at our Pani Puri Walas on the street. So now they're offering you mineral water. They're suddenly wearing gloves. They're doing Raj Kachoris and heaven knows what else. They're innovating. They've added momos to their portfolio. Large companies are not doing that. So that's really why. But as I said, it's going to change once with this whole new economy business models. But that's again coming from the small guys with deep pocket investors.
I'm going to move on to the other question. In the book, you specifically talk about the language barrier and how English is no longer the most important language that you need to have in order to kind of ace the Indian market. The opening up of the internet and with that, the linguistic diversity of the country, how is that driving the consumption story in conjunction with the bottom of the pyramid approach?
If I'm to understand your question, I think the fact of the matter is that we're getting more and more fragmented. I also quote Ernst & Young or PwC or somebody who's showing a lot of the OTT viewing is in local languages. So, and also with local language capability in terms of tech, I think there are more and more local language creators that are coming up. So when there is more and more excitement in the local language, English is something that you need in order to command price premiums and so on and so forth in the job market up to a point. But I'm also saying that right now the availability of language options and how technology can support it. So, for example, if you don't read and write a particular language, I've talked about how Roman English or the Roman letters of English are used for any local language. KYA, kya, HAI, hai. So I noticed that even people with, and everybody's been to school now, that we have managed to achieve, right? So everybody understands ABCD. So phonetically, we are actually using English to speak many Indian languages in terms of SMS and text. And you also have Google Indic, which transliterates for you in the local language, so you don't really have to know it. So I think there are many bridges being built, and all these bridges being built are actually good for us. So in the event of people, I mean, by bottom of the pyramid, if you mean people who are not very highly educated and so on, which is even at the top of the income pyramids. But if you say that, and now, for example, I'm also saying that you can do your IAS exam in the vernacular language, right? So you will get IAS officers who are more comfortable in the vernacular than in English. So if you take all these things together, there seems to be a pattern that says that there are many bridges to many languages, and many languages will survive and thrive. And English is also needed, but as Shekhar Gupta once said, we speak many dialects of English as well. I mean, you know that. English is different from the Gurgaon English is different from Bengali English. So there we go.
So all of this diversity, the reason I keep on coming back to this is because all of this diversity, when we look at the models that have been able to scale up and create a huge sort of accumulation of all of this and have huge consumer bases. So, for example, for a long period of time, as you just said, or rather, when you answered the first question, we tended to be compared to, say, a Mexico or a China. Now, of course, people realize that we are very, very different. But what Mexico and China have is not that much of diversity. And that's been the reason that you have a huge 3 or 4 companies that do different kinds of things in retailing, right? You have an Alibaba, you have a PDD, so on and so forth. How does all of this, although you are focused on largely on the demand side, but in this book, I think you've made an exception and you're also looking at the supply side. So how does this diversity affect the supply side? And how do companies really scale up? That is a question that we keep on coming back to. How do we scale up? Because after a point of time, scaling becomes ridiculously hard.
Yes and no. I mean, you're right that firstly, our diversity causes what I call the cost of complexity. So I think the more and that's the reason why physical retail never really worked in India, because every 10 kilometers you had a different assortment of goods you needed. The rice was different, the dal was different, the oil was different, and so on. And to take the case of physical retail, you needed to build large scale in order to be able to buy cheap and sell cheap. That was taking a long time to come, and even patient capital was getting impatient. Yeah, that is one of the issues that is wrong or difficult, I think, about India, and that's a fact. One is that, and the other is the long tail. If you want to target India's rich, you have to go down to the small villages where the rich landowners are, and you have to go to the big metros as well. So long tails and fragmented or diversity are issues that jack up the cost of complexity. Now, the reason all of us get paid to do the jobs we do, and the reason we even bother to have any kind of business education, is to figure out how do you solve this in the most cost-effective manner. I mean, for example, if you're an often debate in the two-wheeler business was, do you need a whole new chassis and a whole new engine for a whole new geography? Or is there a way by which you can actually reduce that cost of complexity by having certain things that are common? Similarly, in the history of time, I once published a paper in the European Society of Market Research, I don't know, about 25 years ago, where I quoted both Taza, Lipton Taza and Tata Tea's, I think it was Tata Tea, but certainly Lipton Taza, where the brand was the same, but it was Assam tea and Assam and Darjeeling tea and Darjeeling and flavored tea markets and strong tea markets. But Taza as a proposition works right across the board. So similarly, I think Horlicks from the beginning of time, if you look back pre-1991, where I think we were more sophisticated marketers then because we didn't have terrific products. Pre-1991, we actually had a lot of, if you remember the old, you may not remember, but if you go back to the archives, all the television campaigns, the Horlicks campaign for the South was different from the Horlicks campaign in Bengal, but it was the same message, but just executed differently. So, I mean, it's not such a big deal to say, how do you scale? I mean, you just have to find a way to scale to reduce the cost of complexity. It's like saying if I have multiple segments, then, obviously the greater the number of segments, the cost is different. But in this day and age, you can do all kinds of mixes and matches and do them much cheaper. So I think, yes, profitable scaling is an issue because it requires far more innovation to think through these things, but is not impossible to do by a long shot. And I think that's what business is paid for. That's what business design is. That's what business models do.
Right. Okay. So now that I've been asking a lot of questions from the book, but there's a question that has been troubling me, which is outside the book. And that's the RBI. So you are appreciative of RBI, that RBI got banks to open up branches, figure out things so that everybody now has a bank account. But RBI has been putting out these reports that are very interesting, that are saying that, people in India have stopped saving. A lot of the consumption, they've stopped saving, or the saving is constantly coming down. And a lot of consumption is happening through debt. And this is interesting because a lot of aspirational consumption that is happening, especially in the metro areas, is happening on debt. And this debt-fueled consumption, because as when you were answering the first question, you said that now consumption has been, purified. So consumption itself is not bad. but the debt-laden consumption, because let's take the example of a large edtech company that was trying to sell courses to students across the spectrum. But there was another financial company that was kind of selling them EMIs. And it turns out later that the financial company really had no idea about the ability of these people to pay back. So it adds to sort of the gray zone that we have about consumption. So how do we actually build better safeguards around the consumption story, especially if it is coming from debt?
Well, firstly, we have to understand it better. I am not at all persuaded that all the different discrete data points weave together to form a story. So, oh yeah, the savings rate is coming down. So yes, it has come down. It's at an all-time low. Yes, the savings rate has come down, and therefore it's all going to fuel consumption. And all that consumption is coming from poorer people who can't afford to consume, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we need to disaggregate the story. I'm not sure I have a full disaggregation of it, but for a start, who saves? We know that household savings is important for the economy. The rich are the ones. I mean, 90% of the surplus income, almost 100% of the surplus income comes from the top 40% of the country. The rest doesn't save. Okay, so poor people rampantly consuming against debt, etc., and the savings rate coming down. I mean, something's missing in that argument.
Right.
Then, as I've also quoted in my book, SBI put out a report that said that it's actually going into physical savings. So financial savings are going into physical savings, and physical savings are accounted in a different place. So I have talked about that report. That is, it's going into houses, and it's going into fixed capital of some kind. And yes, it is true that we have. Yes, it is true that we have more retail debt now than we've had before. But again, it is not true that we have NPAs that are running out of control. So I mean, where is that happening? In fact, we find that the portfolios at the lower end are actually pretty good in terms of payback. If you look at collections, and if you just look at the NPA story outside of the COVID period, I don't think now where the NPA story goes bad is where banks decide that they want to boost, or NBFCs decide that they want to boost their top lines, and they decide that they're going to play the game and they're going to give out a lot of money without actually looking at whether there is an ability for the person to pay back or not to pay back. And what they're saying is, this is my gross NPA, I'll write it off, I'll still have a net NPA, and that is my credit cost, and I'll be okay. Now, that's a game they choose to play, and that's why I think the regulator has also got something called a right to suitability in consumer rights. And I think the right to suitability means that if you have been sold a product that you shouldn't have been sold a product, then it is the vendor who has to beware and not the consumer. So similarly, for example, if you remember the time when there were loans that were given for cars all the time, the Ola and the Uber, and and then that whole thing started unwinding. That was just a Ponzi scheme. You gave a lot of dealers a lot of money. They in turn used it for something else, and then, or you ended up having 8 Maruti Gypsies lined up outside Tadoba, all brand new, when actually year-round demand didn't justify it. Now, I think we have to separate out all these things and figure out exactly what is going on. It is true that after COVID, a lot of savings have been, a lot of people have been hit. But those in any case were not saving, and those who were, so the top end also has had its income come down. It has not collapsed, but incomes have generally been down. So I think it's a combination of these things. I am not at all persuaded that a lot of the consumption, yes, a lot of the some of the consumption is certainly debt-fueled consumption. But then why would Bajaj Finance stock be so high if people were not paying back? It doesn't make sense to me. So I think God is in the detail. So right. No, I am not overly concerned about being a profligate society that borrows crazily and doesn't pay back. And I think it's up to banks also to decide creditworthiness and to have products accordingly.
Right. That's an interesting answer. That's an interesting way to look at it. And perhaps it needs to be kind of fully developed, but, because it's a cautionary thing that keeps on coming up from the other. fact, I think recently also they released a report. So now that we're hitting the magical 50-minute mark, I have two last questions for you from my side, and then I'm going to open it up to a lot of people. 45 people are listening to you as you speak, and I'm pretty sure they might have a couple of questions. We'll take two or three of them, and then you have a very interesting thing, and because we do a bunch of that analysis here in Asia. So walk us through the problem of doing these income-based surveys, because that's a very interesting perspective that you have, and it's coming in from the real world. I mean, the reason we want to do it is because for us, it's trying to understand what's happening in India, what's happening in China. But the use cases that you're talking about, these are expensive surveys to do, but also nobody wants to do them. And then your socioeconomic classification of the consumer is still stuck in 2010. So you're really making up these purchasing decisions. A lot of the students who have joined us today, when they'll be managers tomorrow, and when they're trying to drill down in the data and find out who their consumer is, chances are the rate at which the government is doing these surveys, the 2010 survey would still be the benchmark. But why isn't the CMIE jumping into it? You were part of a think tank that was pursuing it. So walk us through the modularity of these surveys, because I think that is a fascinating part of the book.
Income surveys in India cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money. So there are, as I've written often, there are two kinds. There are many ways in which you can measure income. You can do a claimed income, ask a question, get an answer. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, if you ask the same question again, and I spent a lot of my life in market research agencies and in founding groups of them. So if you ask the same question, if different people ask the same question with the same rigor of sampling, you generally get the same answer. Which means that it is what statistically is a valid indicator, but it's not is a reliable indicator, but not a valid indicator. Meaning that we don't know what kind of income it measures, right? Does it measure, and usually if you do it at the doorstep with the housewife who doesn't know कि मेरे को इतना पैसा मिलता है महीने में खर्चा के लिए, in order to spend, this is the amount of money I get. But then I don't know whether EMI is deducted, whether there's PF and gratuity, whether the housing is free. All these things add up to income, right?
Right.
So there are people around the world who actually sit down and say that these are a bunch of economists who say that these are the golden guidelines to actually do this. But for example, if you're a farmer, we have to really sit with you and walk you through the farm economics if you're a small farmer to be able to understand your income and your expenditure. Now, this means you can do very few interviews in a day. You need more skilled interviewers, plus you need larger samples because of the diversity of the countries we've talked about. And if you wanted representative by state, by tier, etc., you need sample sizes where at least the listing phase is, 200,000, 300,000, and the detailed interviews have to be really well done at 40, 50,000. A lot of that costs a lot of money, more so now. And there seem to be no takers. NCAR used to do it. They did absolutely exceptional work once upon a time, but over time they've got other stuff that they want to do, so they're not doing it. The think tank that I founded to fill that void, along with a colleague of mine who's ex-NCAR and a friend, he actually set that up. We set that up, but then we found that no one was really paying for the data. We were just marketing it wrong. Why is no one paying for it? Because, when the economy, right now everybody believes that as I've often written, that it's the government of India's job to create demand. So if GDP goes up, demand goes up. So I think we're in a situation where demand is really not the issue, right? And if you increase distribution, if you take care of efficiencies, if you make things more easily available, if your wholesalers are getting better and better at what they do and more modern, then you don't really need to understand any income data. You just get on with it. In fact, if you ask most companies that explain to me which income group contributes how much to your revenue and how much to your profit, you will not get an answer. It's because it's expensive. We've had to beg, borrow. So the reason I also got out of the think tank partly is because I want to do other stuff. But partly, this going with a begging bowl in order to get money to do the surveys, and the frustration that there was no market demand for that, can tend to have your colleagues to cut corners. And once we cut corners, we're dead. So, that's really where it is. But we also saw that the recent household consumption study that's come out by the government has broadly, in terms of ballpark, now they're doing expenditure studies. That's what they always do. They're doing expenditure studies, and the expenditure to income ratios are still a little bit unclear. So who is actually going to fund these? I think the more, maybe when competition builds up, when demand is hard to come by, maybe people will spend. But the message to your students also is that don't sit and imagine data. But honestly, when I look at reports from global leading consulting companies here, I'm asking myself, where did you get this data from? You're putting out stuff that says, cute little labels, aspirers, strivers. They're not even attitude segments, they're just labels you make up. But where did you get that data from? They say, partly from analogies from other countries. And I'm saying that how can you borrow an analogy from another country? As I've said in my book as well, if you have political party A, you will end up with one kind of income distribution, as we've seen from the campaigning, if they walk their talk. And if you have political party B, you will end up with another distribution. So as of now, it's not making a material difference to anybody because there's enough to go around, hopefully in time. But I think these things central bodies have to do. And a CMI can do it, but a CMI is a private creature. I think it's something that the government is going to have to mount and start putting out. So for a start, I'm looking forward to the new census because that's also long overdue. I think that will tell us how much people have progressed over time. And I think companies have a lot of their own sort of granular data from where they form an approximate map and they continue. So if they suddenly find that in some particular area, suddenly sales have started going up, then they investigate that area a little closely, try and understand it. So it's not that companies are flying completely blind. It's just that everybody has their own little proprietary data set for their own strategy. And it's not the way we'd like to see income expenditure studies. Right now, there is no place in India that has income into, how we earn, how we spend, how we think, how we live, how we access public amenities, all in the same roof. And hopefully one day, inshallah, we will get it.
Right. Thank you. Two small questions before we open it up. I know I said the other one was the one small question. What is the impact of social security on the consumption story? So you now have a lot of state governments that are providing some sort of guardrails to women, say by giving access to free bus travel, giving them a certain amount of cash transfer. Does that change the rural consumption story at all? This was a question that I've been kind of pondering for some time. And I just wanted your opinion on it.
I wish I had data more than opinion. But I would tell you that if obviously you are getting more money into your hands, you are likely to spend that money.
Instead of saving it?
Instead of saving it right now, because I think, as I told you, 60% of India do not save. They live hand to mouth. So, right. Maybe 40% have the savings, another 20 are sort of breaking even, but very fragile. So you still have some way to go in order to be able to live better. And you may save a small part of it, but you may spend it. So if you're given free transport, I think the theory of the case is that it should improve labor productivity. So there are some things. I think the Prime Minister may have had an interesting interview in one of the series of interviews I saw, where, if I understood him correctly, what he was saying is that there is some kind of social welfare that builds capacity and capability, and there's some kind of social welfare that's a freebie. I think when you give girls bicycles, as happened in Bihar a long time back, or if you give women free travel, I think you're basically saying, go out there and be productive. We're taking away one more impediment along the way. And either be productive or go out and do outdoor work and leave your husband to be more productive or whatever it is. But overall, I think if you can widen your footprint of influence, you can be more productive. You can send your kids to better schools, a little further away, drop them, pick them up, do stuff like that. So I think that's really what it does. a lot of free food. In fact, people are also saying that a lot of the rural recovery is because there is a lot of free food that is being given, and people don't need to spend that money on food. So you can spend it now. Where do Indians spend? Actually, it doesn't mean we go off and buy, I don't know, luxury handbags or anything like that. It is education, it is healthcare, it is conveyance, it is communication. And what Akhilesh Tilotia with, I forget where he's now. He used to be a banker. He's now, just Google him and you will know he writes a very interesting blog. But Akhilesh's book talks about the private cost of public goods. So quite clearly, if your electricity is patchy, you will spend on an inverter. Think of all the water and tankers that we're buying, right? So there is a lot of public cost to private goods. So we are spending a lot on the basics of living. If we had absolutely, in fact, even the lowest income, as you know, is moving their children out of government schools. फिर उनको ट्यूशन भी लगाना पड़ता है because the parents don't understand it. So I think that's where a lot of the stuff is going, right? It's not going on endless mountains of Cadbury chocolates. It's going on, as I say, Indian consumption is very utilitarian. It's pragmatic, and even data to watch YouTube. I think movies is pragmatic because because it saves you from spending on other forms of entertainment. And so that's, I think, where we are.
Right. Thank you. It's been very enlightening. Last question, because you also don one of your hats is a management professor at IMA, and we have a lot of people here who are related to the business world. You're very hopeful about the consumption story overall. You're hopeful about the fact that it's going to scale up. There are going to be drivers, and perhaps everybody who wants to try their hand at entrepreneurship could actually go ahead and give it a go. There are a lot of problems to solve. What would you advise them to stay away from? What is the cautionary tale? What is the sting in the tail that you would like everybody to be mindful
of? The herd mentality that when young wannabe entrepreneurs come and say to me, what business should I be doing? They've already lost it. If you're going to ask what business should I be doing and copying what somebody else is doing and looking at what is growing and what is not, then you better not be an entrepreneur. I think if you have a pressing problem you want to solve, a passion that you know how to create value. I mean, the dharma of business is to add value to the customer and extract value from the customer. There is no other. Customers, B2B, B2C, big B to small b, it doesn't matter. So I would say stay away from categories where you think, or businesses where you think it's booming. So for example, today, yes, edtech is good. Yes, edtech is important. But if you don't have a point of view and an understanding of what it is doing for which consumer base and which part of it you want to get into and why you think you should win, you shouldn't be doing it. I think that is if you like my cautionary tale, that don't follow the herd and follow the clan, follow the customer, and develop a point of view on how you can serve the customer better.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So that's where we stop it today. It's been an amazing discussion, and it's a great book. So hopefully we have you on it as soon as possible. And whenever you want to have the conversation about China, it'll be our pleasure.